Okay, so I'm just trying to, you notice I divided my canvas up into the thirds, roughly, not exact or anything, but just roughly dividing it up into the thirds, and then finding the center of my canvas and the major diagonal axis, just to get a feel of if I'm placing things really well. I don't always do this, of course. I probably do it more so when I'm plein air painting, when I feel kind of rushed. Otherwise, I really just take a long time to size and place, and turning the canvas upside down and just kind of trusting my instincts as far as where the objects go. So you can just see how I've loosely plotted in my base here. It's from what I understand, it's an old antique Chinese jar with a cobalt glaze on it, and it has a sort of a calligraphy design or a character on it, and it's really pale. The glaze and anyways, it's faded a lot. So I usually wind up making it a little stronger or more colorful in my painting. Not always, depends on the painting. In this case, I think I will probably give it more color since it is sort of the star of the show. And now just going through and wiping back out for my lights and looking for the parts of the form that are in shadow. And this whole time I've just been using burnt umber and a little touch of blue. So this first part is really key. You can see I have this little plum on the left-hand side. It sort of lines up on the diagonal line to the pink rose. And this is a little painting, by the way. It's size 6 by 8. I need to paint some of these because, anyways, I promised someone that I would paint some 6 by 8s. So this is sort of giving me my video for you guys and also fulfilling my promise. So then going through and putting in some of my shadow colors. And here I started setting in my darkest dark. I think this is really important, and it's something I didn't used to do when I first started painting. And oftentimes, the problem I would have if I didn't do this was I would make the background way too dark, and my paintings would wind up looking really too dark and kind of losing a little bit of an atmospheric perspective. So usually your darkest element is in the foreground. In the background, the thought process is that you want the background to recede in comparison to the foreground material. And so then just going through and using some so to get my darkest dark, the absolute darkest dark on my panel I can achieve would be ivory black and alizarin crimson. And in this case today I am working with quinacridone magenta instead of alizarin, just because I really like to get that color on this particular rose, which is quite a bit more hot pink. My alizarin is a little more neutral and warmer. So the quinacridone really gets the coolness and intensity of that pink in the rose. And then my shadow mixtures here are just ivory black plus some cad red light and cad yellow deep for the orange, adding a little bit more of the cad yellow light into cad yellow deep into this mixture for the white pot. But you don't necessarily have to do that. You could actually just start them off both with the same shadow color. And as I'm working the painting, I'll really try to watch the proportions. I want my jar and the pink rose to stay the biggest. And I will say, it's kind of one thing I thought about when I was setting this up was the fact that I have these two roses, and I kind of thought about getting rid of the big one, but I just like it so much, so we'll see if my thought, what I was sort of afraid of was that perhaps I would have too many equal masses, but I like the visual interest that the rose, the more open rose brings to the picture. So I'm going to see if I can get that to cooperate. So now that I've set my darkest dark in the foreground, I can, maybe go for a little more color in the background area here. And, just make sure, I just want to make sure it's a little bit cooler and just, a touch, at least a touch lighter than what I have on the plum. And, I'm not totally thrilled with the shape of this. I may adjust the shape of it. So, and that's what I love about painting, is that, especially oils, you can really wait until you feel very open to, open to change or open to perceive a little bit more. So this will be sort of my shadowy side, which is going to be a lot. This is going to be a nice bright light, and that will fill the canvas with quite a bit of light. And then I do want to transition on this side and use mixing my color. Make a lighter version of that background color. And let's see here. I can probably build even more light into this value as I go. And while I'm doing this, just try to maintain an edge. I mean, a lot of this, a hard enough edge, but as you see, the two paint mixtures are kind of mixing in together. And when that happens, you just have to go back. It's a little bit like pickup sticks. You just have to go back and get your edge back again. I think I need a little bit more negative space in here in between these two flowers. So on this side, this is the light against the dark here, and then not quite there yet. Right now they're kind of same value. And on this side, my thinking is to make this a dark against the light of the background. So this mixture, this had the raw umber and a touch of blue. This mixture has the same colors just with some Naples yellow light, and also some white for the moment. The background colors almost always wind up being something that gets painted into a lot, in working out transitions and things. And I'll leave kind of this sort of open stuff out here in the corners. Mostly I want some color and paint around the objects that I need to pop forward, so to speak. Okay. I'm also thinking that I would like to do a reflective tabletop, which means that I need to start this off as a little more transparent and darker and warmer. Now, generally, all of your top planes are lighter in value, since most of the time, and in my case, the light is coming from above. But if you have a situation where, so generally you would start this off, you would paint this much lighter to indicate that. But there are some circumstances where you will have a tabletop that is very dark and reflective and highly glazed. So it's almost like painting in a landscape, like if you have a body of water or like a still, quiet pond, that everything is really reflecting into, versus the values that a flat value that you might see on something non-reflective, like a meadow or a flat plain of grass. So because it's reflecting, it's going to pick up the darker values, and also taking it warmer and darker gives me the tone of the table, as well as the value that I can play up the reflections into as I work the lights. Just going through and reinforcing some cast shadows underneath. And I generally start these out darker, and I think I might move this little guy down, this little clementine or mandarin down a bit. And of course, cast shadows aren't all one flat shape and one value and one dark, but I always go from the simplest statement of something and then start to work details into it as I go along. Oops, sorry. And I have this, little pieces of debris or they're little petal pieces and little leaf pieces. I like having smaller things like that in for a variety of scale. When you have really tiny little things, I think it helps give a sense of the largeness of the other objects. that's just some straight white at the moment. And a lot of times I will do that because I'll have my darkest dark in place now and my lightest light. That's as dark as I can go and as light as I can go in an alla prima session. With this, palette, of course. Put a little more blue into that. So I feel like if you don't have that gauge there, a lot of times what winds up happening is sometimes if people just leave this painted in with the raw umber or the burnt umber, they start to judge all of the other values against, the original sketch in value, which was very transparent and actually reads a lot lighter because it's a transparent color. So then they start judging all the values. So that's something that can happen to you. And I really want to get the full range of values available within my palette to get as much sort of that tension and that contrast between brights and desaturated tones and light lights and dark, really dark darks. Continue to just sort of modify this shape until I feel pleased with it. So I put in a really strong statement of how light is moving across this form and how the light gets dimmer and warmer as it moves further down away from the light source and also at a perpendicular angle to the light. Whereas up here, as I mentioned before, that's more of a top plane. And so top planes, so something will get more light depending on the angle that it's at. And these forms change direction. So this curved part is, coming out at an angle and then turning under and then going straight down. It's a slight turn. It's not a really fast turn. And then I can just sort of get a gentler gradation. But I sometimes find that if I don't, it's kind of like painting a sunrise to me, like the sky on the sunrise. If I don't put in the changes boldly, like how the light is changing boldly in the beginning, I tend to kind of miss that effect. And that's really what I'm looking for, trying to get an effect of the light. And as you're working that, if you lose some of the oomph of your highlight because again, I just kind of placed it in there for a value range and also to give me a rough idea of where that plane is starting to turn. If you lose it, you could just replace it, of course. I'm always trying to do something well the first time, but I always know that 9 times out of 10 things wind up getting readjusted, moved about. You might see that you just had the highlight slightly off position. So now that I have enough of the form going in that, I'm going to move away from it. I'm not going to put the pattern on it yet. I want to make sure that I'm paying attention to working the whole painting. And again, this is probably a little too strong of a reflected light to begin with, but I can always quiet it down. But mostly I'm just trying to get that idea, that ricochet of color and light. And actually this kind of got really a lot of that underpainting color on it. So I'm just going to wipe away a bit, because that will affect how the color dries. Especially if you're only going to work on it one time, which sometimes I do, and sometimes I go back and work on them again. It kind of depends on the situation. There's a lot of different factors that would go into that decision. For the most part, I try to get a little idea of either the brightest bright or the lightest light on the object, some amount of the highlight right away to automatically get the eye to focus on the inside of the form and bring in a little bit of the three-dimensionality to it. And I fuss with transitions and subtleties as I go. So now that I can see this color in relationship to, say, the color on the tabletop plane, I can see that, maybe I want to have a little more difference in color between the tabletop plane and the shadow color on the orange. And because I want to use some of these reflections on the tabletop plane, I could just let some light kind of break that edge, the ending, the base edge, and let some color and light spill out. So I have this whole flow of sort of orange reflected light. Just reinforcing silhouettes. If this is perhaps a little too lost, or it is too lost of an edge. So where I might put in information or make a change would be in order to accomplish something. So, not just putting things in because you see them there necessarily, but just a little bit of light on the table behind this, to pop the silhouette, if this is something that you want to see a little bit more in clarity. If it's more, you want to keep it more mysterious, then you wouldn't do that there. Just trying to get some idea of these scattered petals and how that's going to look. And reinforcing the start of the shadow here. Will be a little bit tough to do, so small, but I may have to, I'll see what I can do. It's always easier to paint these more complex forms on a larger scale. So I really just kind of want to look for some of their the major shapes of light, major characteristics of this. One thing to keep in mind on these little roses is that the petals are always subordinate to the whole. So you never want to think of the petals outside of the context of how they are all connected together on sort of this central axis, and they're radiating out around that center piece. So you really want to pay attention on flowers that you're getting the perspective of them properly. Otherwise, you can start to get that sort of that look of petals that look like they've just been stuck on, glued on, so to speak. And I always feel that the silhouette, or the contour, I guess you could say it that way too, another word for it, is so important to observe sensitively, to really look for the ins and outs. There's a lot of overlaps, little tiny overlaps and meeting places here. And if you can observe, I feel like if you can observe a few of them really sensitively and well, you don't have to do every single one. So again, I just started some of the major overlaps and shapes that I'm seeing, and I could take it as finished as I want to. So this one, this whole plane is going back in space, and really only a couple of these petals are catching the light. The open one is a bit of a different story. So you do want to, so you could kind of think of it like this one is more in profile, like if you were painting a profile portrait. This one would be the one that's more in profile, and this one would be the one that's more head-on facing you. I'm just trying to pick out a couple of darker accents. Probably have at least three values to do in these roses. And you can wash out a lot of the local color in the light, or vice versa in the shadow, but especially on something like this rose, that red is a lower value, just naturally. You can start to kind of pull some of where the light pieces on this one are going to be off with my brush, just to get the sensation of the rose going. So usually the petals that you're seeing more of the petals are going to go a little bit, get more light and receive more light. The petals that you see less of, they're probably going to be a little more colorful and not quite as lit up. Just notice that edge of light felt a little bit weak. And you can turn your brush on its side, not your side, its side. And to get a thinner edge. Since the you know, crimson, magenta, even blues. These colors are so transparent, so even in a shadow, you might need to add something with some more opacity to actually see what the color is. So you might have to add a little bit of white to it, or, you know, a cadmium or some Naples yellow. So those darker parts within the rose are still not nearly as close in value as, say, the dark on the plum. So I just want to make sure that I'm not taking anything too dark. Like this feels a little bit dark in here, especially since a tiny bit of light is picking up on the edge there. It's not fully in shadow. So it's almost like every object has something of its own identifiable local, what I would say, local value, as well as local color. So, you know, the whole orange falls into a certain value, and so does the plum, so does the pot, so do the roses. So if you do have a lot of abrupt, you know, changes in that value range, these two are separated, so if you do have a lot of abrupt changes, it'll start to look real piecey, and you'll kind of lose the larger shape, the larger function that that particular object is bringing to the painting. So the point I'm trying to get at is, while there are darks and lights within this rose, you really want to keep making sure that, I want to make sure that I keep moving my eye around the canvas and looking at other things, is what I'm trying to say. Keeping a little bit of purple in there. And then I need to have one or two at least overlapping in front of this jar. You know, things, if something's in front of something else, you need to show it. You don't want any awkward tangents or meeting places. No awkward meetings. We're artists. We don't like awkward meetings. And we don't like jobs. Not Steve Jobs working a job. Okay. So I think that will be enough for now to move forward, move on to something else. I like to do enough on something to get the gist of it, and then come back and reanalyze what I missed, or, sometimes you may not have to do much at all, but if I keep just focusing on this rose and going, oh, is it right, is it right, is it right, I could be working on it for a long, long time. So I want to make sure, again, that, all of the parts are working in harmony together. And so in order to do that, I've really got to make sure that I work the painting up, work all the parts up together, not separate. So I am trying to sort of analyze where I'm at here on the jar, because I want to start getting in the symbol, the pattern. I feel like that's something that is sort of equal. I kind of think of all these objects as sort of having a pull or a rank, sort of you have the star performer, and then, maybe just a character that shows up for a small scene. They all matter, they are all important, but some of them have more visual weight than others. So sometimes too, part of getting something to show up is you've got to look at what's around it, see if you can get the edges to be a little more sharp or clear. Sometimes you need a value change or a color change. Sort of a bigger open shadow here, which goes a bit warmer. And then maybe deep in the belly of it, you're going to have a darker accent. Sort of that's well, just what I said, an accent. It's not really the value of the shadow, it's sort of a crevice shadow where the least amount of light is getting in. It's really blocking light. If you put down enough paint, a lot of these transitions and effects can be made by sort of painting into that wet paint or dragging two layers together. I like to steal, if it works. If it doesn't work, well, then you've got to do something else. But I like to steal colors from other areas. take them right off the panel and paint it into something else. If I'm just trying to modify something just slightly. So this is still sort of a bumpy transition here. But there is sort of a roughness and sort of a variation in this glazing. So actually I feel like that got a bit closer to the characteristic instead of everything being really smooth. A really smooth transition. It's a smooth porcelain jar, but it's also old and got some real kind of gritty stuff going on with it. And just like there's, say, as dark as you can go in the paint and as light as you can go and as colorful as you can go, one thing you also don't want to forget about trying to explore the possibilities of will be thin versus thick. You know, more subtle things like shadows, or if a shadow value is coming really close to the same, you know, a similar color and a similar value as what's behind it. These are areas that might take a little more problem solving, you know, to figure out what to do. And I think it's important too that you think about it in terms like that, like it's just a visual problem solving situation. It's not, well, that's the background color that's up there, that's the value that's up there, you know, and I mustn't do anything other than that, you know. So it's, that's not really how you want to be thinking about it. So you want to just use values, colors to aid you in getting the picture painted, really, to making it effective, interesting. And use a little bit of that blue-green. You know, you could take these ideas and go to the extreme with them. You know, you could see how much transition color can I put in before it starts to be too noticeable. So there's no rule that says how much or how little or do you need it at all, you know. These are things you want to play around with. How much information you give to this orange depends on where it's at in your painting, how much you want it to stand out. You know, I haven't hardly even touched this plum because, you know, it's like, well, I'm sort of starting at the main guts of the painting, and then, you know, the plum is a really quiet start to the painting. I do want a little more detail there to, you know, indicate what the thing is. So, anyways, hopefully you understand what I'm trying to say. But this is not as imperative as, say, these objects here, and especially this and this. So, you know, even the color that you put in for reflection can give a sense of the local color. You know, the fact that this reflection is warmer and this one is cooler. This reflection is cooler. You're not ever going to come. You got to keep the value close enough that it reads as a reflection. It can't come to the same amount of impasto and light and coolness as what's on that jar. Okay, so this, how the pattern is curving here with the curve of the base, I think is really going to help me to see what I'm missing as far as the form goes, and it actually will describe a lot of the form for me if I get the drawing correct. You know, how this is, you know, pushing out this way with this side of the contour, and it can help me to look to see where I might need to alter or round things elsewhere. Even these little stripes, you know, they're going with that ellipse, and don't just want to paint it the same blue all the way through. Same blue all the way through. So you want to think about, you know, which part of the pattern, just like light is transitioning across the vase, of course the pattern is on the vase, so you have to transition the light on the pattern as well. And don't worry too much too about having perfection or variety, I think, is key. Or maybe variety is not the right word. Variety, perfection. So I think that straight ultramarine blue might have been a bit too, you know, candy colored. I don't know. Adding a little bit of black for the darker elements and a little bit of yellow and white. I could just paint into this. Also just kind of bleaching out some of the identity of the pattern. Just kind of taking some of that highlight color actually. Just very gently dragging it. So where it's closest to the light, just bleaching it out. Those areas. Sort of the middle band. It's more the true local color. And where the form over here is turning into shadow gets sort of the black and gets a little bit darker. So just looking to see where I can push this convexity out a bit more here, and in turn, you know, come back in and try to perhaps a different stroke would be beneficial as well. These are things that everything has a visual read, so to speak, and there are things that you can do just by altering your brush stroke or direction of your brush stroke that can really communicate very subtly, and then pushing this convexity out a little bit more in the opposite direction of this. And again, as you can see, as I, kind of going back in and reworking these things, we get a lot of these variations and mixtures, wet into wet. Even variation in the shadow, trying not to have the exact same solidity and weight of shadow across the entire shadow. It could just be a very slight change or variation. It was a little too cold. Don't want to lose this outer contour, but also get some reflected light, something kind of similar to the background color. And then I just kind of keep going back, trying to find pulses of here, and I can trying to kind of curve that. Still not totally happy with this shape where the light meets the shadow here. I think that's a little bit better. And of course I'm getting really picky about it, but that's the name of the game, right? Now if you're going for a real playful, you want it to be very playful and spontaneous feeling, and that's totally valid. I mean, I do a lot of paintings like that too, a lot of my daily sketches and plein air sketches and things like that. A little bit more playfulness involved, and bravura, or whatever you want to call it. But in the case of, is sometimes you want to have something a little more subtle, it's just got to get a little more nitpicky. I just thought it might be fun to try to tie some of the color together from the roses to this plum. And, just a little bit of blue and white mixed in with that color I started off with is just enough to give a little dusting to it, and I might make it maybe a little more blue. See, I like the push and pull between these two things. It's kind of fun. So that, that's things that you're looking for, things that interest you, that, and they're not narrative things. It's not like, oh, today I'm painting sunflowers, or, do you know what I mean? It's, you're looking for visual effects or aspects that are interesting to you, like that, like spacing, just really getting lost and interested in how you space things, or how one thing might lead up to the next, and variety in shapes, or patterns in shapes, things like that I think are more interesting visually than trying to come up with some literal narrative. So I thought I'd see what happens if I maybe go too far with this reflected light of the orange. It's like all the colors of the painting are found in this little plum. It's so fun. Okay. And do you have touch of a, I wish I could see a few more of these green leaves. Actually, I could kind of make this one up a bit more, maybe have an overlap. I feel like that could be a useful to make it dark or light. Okay, I think in that case maybe dark, and this one light. You know, that's another thing too. Someone who I've looked at a lot would be, say, Franz Mortelmann's. This all gets really weird in here. I just take this out. And I think the symmetry is also off, like it's growing this way. Anyways, back to what I was talking about before I paid attention to that. So an artist that I really enjoy looking at a lot, one of many, but Innes was, George Innes was really good at this too, and that was, a lot of times I would be looking at their paintings going, okay, they just, changed that or made that up. There's no way that's what it looked like, Okay, that feels a little bit better. So he might use a leaf either as totally a light to show up against the background, or turn it into a dark, just a dark abstract shape. Depends on if he was wanting it to be an active shape or inactive. Okay, so another way you can sort of rein things in or reshape would be to use the background color around it. And I also still needed to bring in some light around that lit edge. So although the background is a dark value, I do want to make sure that I'm really trying to solve problems and talk at the same time here. It's not a good combination. Make sure that light isn't self-contained on this object, so a small amount of halation or a large amount, whatever you, again, take these principles and see how far you can twist and turn them and bend them to your liking. Just getting a little cluttered. I mean, it's such a small painting, easy to do. But again, you don't just put something in because it's there. If you're not sure what the problem is or what's bugging you about it, take it out for now. But something is crucial. Something like that is crucial. Even, anything that's just slightly feels off to you, you want to try to rein it in. I mean, the painting's done whenever you say it's done, whenever you feel like you did what you came to do, or it satisfies your aesthetic viewpoint, you know. Trying to go back and get a harder, cleaner interior edge where the light is hitting this center petal. Again, that's, you know, that's kind of one way that you can help pull the eye to the center of the form, which I think is important to create the illusion of 3 dimensions, so the part of the form that is closest to you. This is just bugging me. When you first start painting too, like if you're like me, you might have very limited energy or attention span, and only be able to take a painting so far. Part of that, I think, also can depend on your personality. Anyway, so you just do with it the best you can. But I think it's important that you try to take it as far to resolution as you can with the energy that you have, and go through the whole start to finish process as often as you can, because that's, you know, doing a lot of paintings is better than doing one really long, drawn out, looking for perfection painting. So just, you know, try to do a lot of bad paintings. Okay, I think that's going to be enough for now. Might look at it again tomorrow or later and see if I want more out of it, or want more subtlety. Things like background, you can go through and kind of, you know, blend the brush if you want to, or just work on it again the next day to get a new layer of light and color. Or leave it, you can also leave it sort of in this unfinished, seemingly unfinished state. Some collectors are really, I think, kind of savvy in that way, that they can appreciate the openness of some of this, and other collectors cannot. They'll think it's unfinished or something if every little corner of the canvas is not covered, or maybe they might think it's damaged or something. And some of these edges get covered up with frames, but even the unfinished stuff, it should look aesthetically, you know, beautiful. Everything that you do should only, you're trying to get it to enhance what's already there. So does it pull more attention to your the center of interest, so to speak, or point of the painting, or does it take away? And that's really all that matters. And sign it go get an ice cream for the day and do another one. Okay, thanks. Bye.